I'm Thorn Ashford, 34, and I built my indie gaming studio from nothing. Last autumn, during our family's annual harvest festival at the estate, I checked my investment accounts and felt my heart stop. Every penny was gone. I thought it was a glitch until my brother-in-law Gage smirked across the wine cellar. "We needed it more than you," he snorted, as if stealing my life savings was justified. Trembling, I reached for my bag and said, "Then you won't mind what's coming next." As they laughed, a loud bang shook the manor house. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up against family betrayal. Growing up in Vermont, I was always the responsible one. Grandmother Cordelia and grandfather Sterling ran a small vineyard, working long hours to give my sister Ember and me a comfortable rural life. I started working at 14, saving every dollar from my summer jobs, while Ember preferred socializing and spending whatever money came her way. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough, and more importantly, my grandparents taught us the value of hard work and integrity. After graduating with a computer science degree, I spent 3 years working at a major gaming corporation, learning the industry from the ground up. Nights and weekends, I developed my business plan for an indie studio that would create immersive, story-driven games with meaningful choices. My friends thought I was crazy when I quit my stable job to launch Shadowmere Studios with my last $5,000 in savings. The first 2 years were brutal, 18-hour days, living on instant noodles and reinvesting every cent of profit back into the business. 5 years ago, tragedy struck when my grandparents died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver. The grief was overwhelming. Ember and I handled it differently. I threw myself into work while she spiraled into depression, dropping out of art school and bouncing between dead-end jobs. When our grandparents' estate was settled, we each inherited $75,000. I invested mine in expanding my studio and building a development team, finally seeing the business gain real traction. Ember met Gage Morrow 3 years ago at a cryptocurrency conference of all places. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that seemed well beyond their means. Gage worked in blockchain consulting, though he was vague about details. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive smartwatch that seemed slightly too flashy, he had a way of dominating conversations, especially about money. From our first meeting, something about him set off alarm bells for me. "Your sister's gaming thing is cute," he'd said at their wedding reception, swirling expensive whiskey in his glass. "But real money is made in crypto and NFTs, not selling fantasy stories to basement dwellers." The comment stung, but I brushed it off for Ember's sake. I tried to build a relationship with Gage, but over time I noticed troubling patterns. When Gage was around, Ember became quieter, constantly checking his reactions before speaking. The vibrant, creative sister I knew seemed to fade away. Phone calls between us grew shorter and less frequent. My suspicions about Gage's financial stability were confirmed when my cousin Phoenix mentioned seeing him arguing with debt collectors outside a local credit union. When I gently asked Ember about their finances, she became defensive, insisting everything was better than ever, despite her increasingly anxious demeanor. The Ashford estate had been in our family for generations, a sprawling vineyard property with a Victorian manor house nestled in Vermont's Green Mountains. After our grandparents died, Ember and I decided to keep it as shared property and continue the annual Harvest Festival tradition. Every October, it was the one time each year when our extended family, uncles, aunts, and cousins gathered for a weekend of wine tasting, storytelling, and celebrating the grape harvest. This particular October, I arrived at the festival with mixed emotions. My gaming studio was finally taking off. I'd just secured distribution deals with major platforms and had been approved for a development expansion loan. The $240,000 in my account was earmarked for hiring additional programmers and funding our next major release. It represented 5 years of 60-hour work weeks, countless sacrifices, and the future I'd been building. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the manor house on Friday afternoon. The familiar stone facade and ivy-covered walls brought a wave of nostalgia. Uncle Dorian was already setting up the wine tasting station, and Aunt Vivienne was arranging autumn flowers on the wraparound porch. Cousin Phoenix waved enthusiastically from the gazebo where she was stringing lights for the evening celebration. "Thorn!" Phoenix called, jogging up from the garden to hug me. "It's been too long. How's the gaming studio?" "Better than ever," I said, popping the trunk to grab my overnight bag. "We're expanding the team and launching our biggest project yet. How are the kids?" "Growing like weeds and bankrupting me with their college applications," she laughed, helping with my cooler. Her voice lowered. "Ember and Gage got here about an hour ago. Just prepare yourself, that bad. Gage has been bragging about some investment windfall. New Tesla, designer clothes. It's a bit much." I nodded, steeling myself as we approached the house. Through the screen door, I could hear Gage's booming voice dominating the conversation, something about a blockchain opportunity that was guaranteed to triple someone's money. Ember spotted me first, her face lighting up briefly before glancing at Gage. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, despite the expensive-looking cashmere sweater and carefully applied makeup. "Thorny," she called, using my childhood nickname as she gave me a quick hug. "You finally made it." Gage turned, raising his wine glass in my direction. "The game developer arrives. Tell us, how's the little studio doing?" "Still making enough games to keep the servers running," I replied, the condescension in his tone unmistakable, but I smiled politely for Ember's sake. "We're expanding, actually. Just secured major platform deals. In this economy?" "Brave," he chuckled, pulling Ember closer in a way that seemed more possessive than affectionate. I noticed a Patek Philippe on his wrist that definitely hadn't been there at Christmas, and Ember's new diamond tennis bracelet caught the afternoon light. Uncle Dorian saved me by announcing it was time to get the wine tasting started, and I used the opportunity to escape to my usual bedroom in the East Wing. As I unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Gage's newfound prosperity. According to Phoenix, he'd been laid off from his consulting firm 6 months ago after clients complained about failed investment advice. I placed my laptop on the antique desk by the window and tucked my tablet into the nightstand drawer, making a mental note to check on some urgent development updates after dinner. What I didn't know then was that this simple family gathering was about to become the battlefield for everything I'd worked for. The first evening of our Harvest Festival followed its familiar rhythm, though the underlying tensions made the air feel heavy despite the cheerful conversation. "Woo!" Aunt Vivienne had outdone herself with a spread of her famous butternut squash soup, herb-crusted bread, and roasted root vegetables that reminded me of childhood autumns. "Thorn, honey, tell us more about the platform deals," Uncle Dorian asked as we gathered around the large oak dining table. A retired literature professor, he'd always been the family mediator, skillfully navigating conversations away from potential conflicts. "It's with Steam, Epic, and PlayStation," I explained, feeling a genuine spark of excitement despite my unease. "The exposure alone should quadruple our player base. Plus, we're developing a VR expansion that could revolutionize narrative gaming." "That sounds expensive," Gage interjected, cutting into his lamb. "Development costs in gaming must be what, 200 per hour for programmers? Seems risky." "I've done my research," I replied evenly. "The numbers work." "Speaking of numbers," Aunt Vivienne chimed in, ever the family gossip collector, "I hear the Morrison boys' tech startup just filed for bankruptcy. Such a shame, these small companies, they're so vulnerable." I noticed Gage's slight smirk and the way he glanced at Ember, who stared intently at her barely touched dinner. Cousin Phoenix, bless her, changed the subject. "Dad, tell everyone about your new sailboat purchase." As Uncle Dorian launched into a detailed description of his retirement splurge, I felt Phoenix squeeze my hand under the table in solidarity. After dinner, as everyone moved to the library for board games and wine, I excused myself to check on some development emails in my room. I immediately noticed something off. My laptop wasn't quite in the position I'd left it, angled slightly differently on the desk. The charging cable was plugged into a different USB port. Small details, but as someone meticulous about my belongings, especially my work devices, the discrepancies set off internal alarms. I opened my laptop and checked my browser history. Nothing unusual appeared, but that didn't mean much if someone knew how to cover their tracks. As I was about to close the laptop, a notification from my investment app appeared. "New device accessing your account." I frowned, clicking through to the security center to find 3 login attempts from an unrecognized device, all within the last hour. The attempts had failed due to incorrect password entries, but the timing was too coincidental to ignore. Closing my laptop, I decided to keep a closer eye on my belongings for the remainder of the weekend. Perhaps I was being paranoid, but something didn't feel right. When I returned to the library, Gage was showing off his new watch, making a show of how the light caught the sapphire crystal. "Limited edition," he boasted to Uncle Dorian. "Only 300 made worldwide." "Must have cost a pretty penny," Uncle Dorian remarked, not sounding particularly impressed. "You've got to spend money to make money," Gage replied with a wink. "I've got some crypto opportunities that would make your retirement portfolio look like pocket change." Ember stood slightly behind him, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. When she saw me, something flickered across her face, guilt, worry. Before I could interpret it, Gage pulled her into the conversation. "Tell them about your new car, babe," he prompted, and Ember dutifully described the luxury Tesla they'd purchased last month. Later, as the evening wound down and people started heading to bed, Phoenix pulled me aside on the back terrace. The gentle rustle of autumn leaves provided background noise. "Something's up with them," she whispered, glancing back at the house. "Ember called me last week asking if she could borrow 8,000, said it was for a medical procedure but wouldn't give details. When I asked if everything was okay with Gage's job, she got defensive and hung up." I sighed, watching the moonlight filter through the vineyard rows. "I think someone tried accessing my investment accounts today." My laptop was moved, and I got security alerts about login attempts. Phoenix's eyes widened. "You don't think?" "I don't know what to think," I admitted, "but I'm changing all my passwords tonight and enabling two-factor authentication on everything." Back in my room, I did exactly that, also taking the precaution of slipping my laptop and tablet into my locked suitcase. Before falling asleep, I received another notification, another failed attempt to access my account, this time from a mobile banking app. The next morning, breakfast was a casual affair with people drifting in and out of the kitchen for coffee and Aunt Vivienne's apple cinnamon pancakes. I noticed Gage watching me from over his coffee mug as I checked my phone. "Business never sleeps, huh?" he remarked. "Must be exhausting being a one-man operation." "I have a team," I corrected him, "good ones. But yes, when you run your own studio, you're never really offline. That's why I prefer crypto trading," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Money working for me, not the other way around." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Sage, my lead developer. I excused myself to take the call on the terrace. "Thorne, something's wrong with the platform payment," she said without preamble. "The transfer bounced. The system says insufficient funds, but that can't be right. We had the money earmarked specifically for this." "That's impossible," I said, my stomach tightening. "Let me check the accounts." I hung up and immediately logged into my investment app, my fingers suddenly clumsy with dread. The password worked, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Every account, from checking to savings to my business investment portfolio, showed the same balance, 0. In disbelief, I clicked through each account's transaction history. Multiple transfers had been made yesterday evening and early this morning, draining every penny to accounts I didn't recognize. Over 240,000 gone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a technical error. Someone had deliberately emptied my accounts. Someone who had access to my devices, who had been watching me, who knew exactly when to strike. I stumbled back into the kitchen, my face surely as white as the knuckles gripping my phone. The casual morning chatter died as everyone turned to look at me. "Thorne?" Uncle Dorian asked, concern etching his face. "What's wrong?" "My money," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "All of it. Gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Uncle Dorian stood up, his breakfast forgotten. My hands trembled as I showed him my phone screen. Every account, completely emptied, over 240,000. All the money from my studio expansion, my personal savings, everything. The kitchen erupted in concerned voices. Aunt Vivienne gasped dramatically. Phoenix rushed to my side, looking at the screen in horror. Only 2 people remained unusually quiet: Ember, who suddenly became intensely interested in her coffee cup, and Gage, whose expression I couldn't quite read. "Have you called the bank?" Phoenix asked, her arm around my shoulders. Not yet, I replied, already dialing the customer service number with shaking fingers. I just saw it. The family fell silent as I spoke with the investment firm representative, putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear. Yes, Mr. Ashford, I'm seeing several large transfers made from your accounts starting at 11:15 p.m. last night and continuing through 4:03 a.m. this morning. The representative confirmed. The transfers appear to have been authorized with your correct credentials. I didn't make those transfers, I insisted, my voice rising. I was asleep. The system shows they were initiated from a device that's been previously used to access your accounts from your current IP address location, she continued, her voice professionally detached. Your password and security questions were correctly entered. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone here, in this house, had accessed my accounts using my own devices. Someone who had watched me closely enough to obtain my passwords, who knew exactly what they were doing. I ended the call after being told the firm would open a fraud investigation, but recovery of the funds wasn't guaranteed since the transfers appeared legitimate from their end. The representative's final words rang in my ears. In cases where someone with access to your devices and passwords makes transfers, it can be difficult to prove fraud versus authorized transactions you later regretted. Whew! Slowly, I turned to face my family gathered around the kitchen table. Uncle Dorian looked concerned, Aunt Vivienne shocked, Phoenix outraged. And then there was Gage, leaning against the counter with arms crossed, a strange calmness about him that felt completely out of place amid the crisis. Someone in this house stole my money, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Someone accessed my laptop yesterday, figured out my passwords, and transferred every cent I have to another account. Now, Thorne, Aunt Vivienne said nervously, let's not jump to conclusions. It could be a technical error, or perhaps you authorized these transfers and forgot. I didn't forget someone stealing my entire life savings, I snapped. The room fell silent again. Uncle Dorian cleared his throat. Thorne's right, this is serious. If someone here is responsible, they need to come forward now before this gets worse. I scanned the faces around me, lingering on Gage's. His expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of satisfaction perhaps. Gage, I said directly, you seemed very interested in my laptop yesterday. Were you in my room while I was helping with the wine setup? Ember immediately bristled. Are you accusing my husband of stealing? That's low, Thorne, even for you. I'm simply asking a question, I replied, not taking my eyes off Gage. It's interesting that you jumped to his defense before he even answered. Gage's mouth curved into a slight smile. Your sister knows I would never need to steal from anyone. Unlike some people, we're doing quite well financially. Then you won't mind showing everyone your investment accounts, I countered, since you're doing so well. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Gage's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with more force. I don't have to prove anything to you, he said coldly. Maybe you should look at your business partner before throwing accusations at family. Or maybe your expansion plans weren't as solid as you thought, and this is a convenient excuse. Stop it, both of you, Ember cried out. She looked pale, almost ill. Thorne, you can't just accuse people without proof. The transfers were made from devices at this location, I said, trying to keep my voice level. From my devices, which someone accessed without my permission. The only people here are family. Uncle Dorian stepped between us, ever the mediator. Let's all take a breath. Thorne, you've called the investment firm and they're investigating. Maybe we should let the professionals handle this. The professionals won't be able to do much if the transfers look legitimate, I said, feeling desperation creeping in. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I turned to grab my phone to call the police when I noticed something. Gage checking his own phone, the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips as he looked at the screen. Something about his confidence, his complete lack of concern in the face of such a serious accusation, made the pieces click together in my mind. It was you, I said quietly, certainty washing over me. You stole my money. The room fell deadly silent. Even Ember seemed to hold her breath. Gage looked up slowly, meeting my gaze with cold eyes. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, incredibly, he shrugged. We needed it more than you, he said, his voice casual as if discussing borrowing a cup of sugar. You've always had it easy, Thorne. Your cute little gaming studio, your perfect tech life. Some of us have real problems. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Aunt Vivienne gasped. Uncle Dorian's mouth fell open. Phoenix swore under her breath. Ember looked like she might faint. Gage, she whispered, tell me you didn't. But his expression told the truth. My brother-in-law had stolen my life savings and he wasn't even trying to deny it. You son of a bitch, I breathed, anger replacing shock. That money wasn't just mine. It was for my employees, for the studio that supports 8 families besides my own. Oh, spare me the guilt trip. Gage rolled his eyes. You'll bounce back. People like you always do. Meanwhile, we're drowning in debt because of Ember's art school loans that you never even bothered to ask about. I looked at my sister in confusion. What art school loans? Ember, are you back in school? She wouldn't meet my eyes, and I saw Gage shoot her a warning glance. It doesn't matter, he said dismissively. What matters is we needed that money more than you did. Consider it a family loan. A loan? I was nearly shouting now. You stole $240,000 from me? I'm calling the police. Gage's expression hardened. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Family loyalty goes both ways, Thorne. You really want your sister to suffer because you can't share your good fortune? Don't you dare talk to me about family loyalty after what you've done, I said, reaching for my phone. Gage lunged forward suddenly, grabbing for my phone. I said no police! Uncle Dorian stepped between us as Phoenix pulled me back. Gage, that's enough, he shouted. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Ember's face, not just upset but terrified. Not of me or the situation, but of Gage. I'd seen that look before on the faces of people in online gaming communities who talked about controlling, abusive partners. Ember? I said more gently. What's really going on here? Talk to me. Before she could answer, Gage cut in. We're done talking. Ember, get our bags. We're leaving. You're not going anywhere until I get my money back, I said firmly. Every penny of it. Today, or I'm calling the police regardless of what you threaten. Gage laughed, the sound cold and mocking. Good luck with that. The money's already been moved again. You'll never find it. Then you won't mind what's coming next, I said, my voice steady despite my trembling hands as I reached for my bag. Gage and Ember laughed, the sound jarring and discordant, hers tinged with hysteria, his with contempt. That's when we heard it, a loud, authoritative bang that shook the entire house. For a moment, everyone froze in confusion. Then came the unmistakable sound of the front door being forced open, followed by multiple sets of heavy footsteps entering the manor house. Police! Everyone stay where you are! The kitchen fell into stunned silence as 2 uniformed officers appeared in the doorway, followed by a plain-clothed detective who surveyed the room with practiced eyes. Thorne Ashford? The detective asked, looking directly at me. I nodded, still processing their sudden appearance. Yes, that's me. I'm Detective Rivera with Burlington PD Financial Crimes Unit, she said, showing her badge. We received an automated alert about suspicious activity on your accounts and attempted identity theft in progress. Gage's face drained of color so quickly I thought he might pass out. Oh! Officers, there's been a misunderstanding, Gage started, his voice suddenly all charm and reasonability. This is a family matter we're in the process of resolving privately. Detective Rivera ignored him, focusing on me. Mr. Ashford, we need to speak with you privately about the activity on your accounts. We already have some information from your investment firm's fraud department. He has no proof of anything, Gage interjected loudly. This is ridiculous. Or, you can't just burst in here on a family weekend. Actually, we can, one of the uniformed officers responded coolly. We have probable cause, and Mr. Ashford's investment firm has already provided preliminary evidence of fraud. I felt a surge of hope as I followed Detective Rivera to the library, leaving the stunned family in the kitchen. Once alone, she explained that my investment firm's fraud detection system had flagged the unusual activity and automatically alerted authorities when the pattern matched known fraud schemes. We need your formal statement, she said, but we've already frozen the receiving accounts. With your cooperation, we have a good chance of recovering most of your funds. When we returned to the kitchen, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Gage was pacing, his earlier smugness replaced by barely controlled panic. Ember sat hunched at the table, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like my money back," I said firmly to Gage. "Every penny of it." "No, it's not that simple," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "The money's been moved, distributed. It's not all in one place anymore." "Then you'd better start explaining exactly where it is," Detective Rivera said, "because right now you're looking at felony charges for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." Gage's composure cracked. "You don't understand. We had debts. Crypto debts to people you don't want to cross. They were threatening us." Ember let out a choked sob. "Gage, stop lying! There are no loan sharks. Just tell the truth for once." The room fell silent again as all eyes turned to my sister. "Ember?" I asked gently. "What's really going on?" She looked up, her face a mask of shame and fear. "There are no art school loans, Thorny. I'm so sorry. He's been crypto trading everything away. My inheritance, our savings, even taking out loans in my name. When he found out about your studio expansion." "Shut up, Ember!" Gage shouted, taking a threatening step toward her. The uniformed officers moved quickly, positioning themselves between Gage and my sister. "Sir, stand down now," one ordered firmly. Detective Rivera turned to Ember. "Mrs. Morrow, are you saying your husband coerced you into this scheme?" Ember nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "She's lying," Gage protested. "This was her idea too. Tell them, Ember. Tell them how you agreed we deserved that money more than your stuck-up brother." I felt physically ill watching my sister shrink under his accusations. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs? "Gage Morrow, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny," Detective Rivera announced, nodding to the officers who moved to handcuff him. "This is ridiculous." Gage struggled against the officers. "It's my word against hers. You have no proof I did anything." "Actually," Uncle Dorian spoke up unexpectedly, "Thorn isn't the first person in this family you've stolen from." All eyes turned to my uncle, whose normally jovial face was set in grim lines. "Last Christmas, my retirement account was accessed and 15,000 disappeared," he continued. "I thought it was a banking error when the money reappeared 4 days later. Now I'm wondering if Gage was testing the waters, seeing if he could get away with it." "Uncle Dorian, why didn't you say anything?" I asked, shocked. "I didn't want to upset the family during the holidays," he admitted. "And when the money returned, I convinced myself it was just a glitch." "Anyone can make accusations," Gage said desperately. "You have no proof." "That's where you're wrong," I said, reaching into my bag. "I do have proof." Gage's expression faltered as I pulled out my phone and opened an app. After someone tried to hack my business servers last year, I installed security software on all my devices. It takes screenshots every time someone enters incorrect passwords and tracks all access attempts. I handed my phone to Detective Rivera, who scrolled through the evidence-clear images of Gage using my laptop in my bedroom. Timestamp data showing his failed and successful login attempts, even keystroke data capturing the account numbers he'd transferred my money to. "This is quite comprehensive," the detective remarked, impressed. Gage's face contorted with rage. "You set me up, you knew all along, and you let me walk right into this." "No, Gage," I said evenly. "You set yourself up, I just made sure you couldn't get away with it." As the officers began leading Gage away, he turned to Ember with a look that sent chills down my spine. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Remember what I told you would happen if you ever crossed me." Detective Rivera immediately took note of the threat. "Add intimidation of a witness to the charges," she instructed the officers. Ember collapsed into sobs as Gage was led out of the house, the screen door slamming behind them. I rushed to my sister's side, wrapping my arms around her trembling shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Thorny," she cried. "I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I was so scared. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. The expensive clothes and jewelry I'd noticed earlier suddenly made terrible sense. Guilt gifts after episodes of abuse. "It's okay," I soothed, though nothing about the situation was remotely okay. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Detective Rivera approached us gently. "Mrs. Morrow, given what I've just witnessed, I have to ask, has your husband been physically abusive toward you?" Ember hesitated, then slowly pushed up her sleeve to reveal a pattern of bruises in different stages of healing. "He's careful," she whispered. always where people won't see. The detective's expression softened with professional compassion. We'll need to document this and take a full statement. There will be resources available to help you. As Ember nodded tearfully, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that Gage was being held accountable, horror at what my sister had endured, and guilt that I hadn't recognized the signs sooner. "What happens now?" I asked the detective. "We'll process Mr. Morrow and continue the investigation," she explained. "Your investment firm is already working to reverse the transfers. With the evidence you've provided, there's a good chance you'll recover most, if not all, of your money." After taking preliminary statements from everyone, the detective left her card and promised to be in touch soon. As the police cars pulled away from the estate, the family gathered in stunned silence in the library. Uncle Dorian was the first to speak. "I think we all need a strong cup of coffee, or something stronger." Aunt Vivienne dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "In 40 years of family gatherings, I never imagined anything like this." Phoenix sat beside Ember, holding her hand supportively. "You're not alone, you know. We're all here for you." I looked around at my family, imperfect, sometimes dysfunctional, but ultimately bound by something stronger than Gage's manipulation and deceit. For the first time since discovering the theft, I allowed myself to take a deep breath. The crisis wasn't over, but at least now we were facing it together. What Gage never understood about me was that I'd learned to be prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. The gaming industry is more competitive than most people realize, and I'd weathered my share of storms. Last year, someone had attempted to hack into my business servers after a disgruntled former contractor sold access credentials on the dark web. The hack was caught quickly, but the experience left me paranoid in a healthy way. I'd immediately hired Raven Cross, a cybersecurity consultant who specialized in small business protection. "Think of it as insurance," Raven had told me as she installed sophisticated monitoring software on all my devices. "You hope you never need it, but if you do, you'll be grateful you have it." The morning after Gage's arrest, while Ember was giving her formal statement to Detective Rivera, I sat on the estate's back terrace with my laptop on a video call with Raven. "Your security measures worked perfectly," she confirmed, reviewing the data. "The software captured everything: timestamps, keystrokes, account numbers. The screenshots even show him inputting the receiving account details." "Thank God I listened to you," I said, still processing how close I'd come to losing everything. "Can you send all this to Detective Rivera? Already packaged and encrypted for law enforcement," Raven assured me. "Thorne, I don't mean to pry, but this wasn't some random hacker. This was family. Are you okay?" I gazed out at the vineyard, watching the morning sunlight filter through the autumn leaves. "I'm still processing," I admitted, "but I'll be all right." After ending the call, I found Phoenix waiting for me in the kitchen with fresh coffee. "You knew," she said, "not a question, but an observation. You suspected Gage and were prepared for this." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Not exactly. I knew someone tried accessing my accounts, but I wasn't sure who. The security measures were already in place from a previous incident." Phoenix shook her head, impressed. "Always 2 steps ahead. That's why your studio succeeds where others fail." I wish I'd been more aware of what was happening with Ember, I said, guilt creeping into my voice. All this time he was abusing her, controlling her, and I had no idea. "Abusers are masters at hiding their true nature," Phoenix said gently. And Ember was too scared and ashamed to reach out. Our conversation was interrupted by Uncle Dorian, who entered the kitchen with a grim expression. "I just got off the phone with my friend at the credit union." I asked him to check if anyone else in the family might have been compromised. "And?" I prompted, feeling a new wave of dread. "Aunt Vivienne's retirement account showed unusual access patterns 2 months ago. Nothing was taken, but someone was definitely looking around. And my daughter's college fund had $2,000 missing last month that was returned 3 days later, disguised as a bank adjustment." He was testing the waters, Phoenix realized, seeing what he could get away with before going for the big score, Thorne's accounts. Uncle Dorian nodded. "I've asked everyone to check their accounts and credit reports. Who knows how many of us he's targeted." Later that afternoon, I found myself alone with Ember for the first time since Gage's arrest. She sat in the garden looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her since we were children. "I don't know who I am anymore, Thorny," she whispered. 3 years with him and I lost myself completely. I became whatever he wanted me to be. I sat beside her, taking her hand. You're still you. You're still the girl who used to organize neighborhood art shows and stand up to bullies at school. He didn't erase that person, he just buried her for a while. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I should have told you what was happening. When he started talking about taking your money, I should have warned you. Why didn't you? I asked gently. He had evidence, things he threatened to use against me if I ever betrayed him, she shuddered. And he said no one would believe me anyway. That they'd all think I was just jealous of your success. What kind of evidence? I asked, suddenly alert. He made me do things, take things from stores. He filmed it. She could barely get the words out. Said he'd send it to everyone we know, to the police. Said I'd go to jail. My blood boiled at the calculated cruelty. Ember, that's blackmail and coercion. Detective Rivera needs to know about this. I told her this morning, she admitted. They're adding more charges, and they found other victims, other women before me. The revelation didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Someone capable of Gage's level of manipulation and abuse rarely stopped at one victim. While searching through Gage's belongings for any additional evidence, Uncle Dorian had made a disturbing discovery, a hidden folder containing personal information on several family members, including bank account numbers, social security numbers, and even copies of driver's licenses. He's been planning this for years, Uncle Dorian told me, showing me the folder. Collecting information bit by bit, probably every time we got together as a family. Among the documents, I found something that made my stomach turn, a detailed timeline of my business activities, including notes about my expansion plans and platform deals. Gage had been stalking my business success, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By evening, Detective Rivera returned with news. We've frozen all accounts connected to your brother-in-law, she informed us. The good news is we've located most of your money, Mr. Ashford. The bad news is he converted some of it to cryptocurrency, which is harder to trace. We're working on that portion. What about the other victims? I asked. Uncle Dorian found evidence he was targeting more family members. We're expanding the investigation, she confirmed. Mr. Morrow appears to have been running a rather sophisticated identity theft operation, not just within your family, but potentially targeting others as well. After the detective left, I sat with Ember on the terrace, our feet dangling over the edge as the sun began to set. The familiar setting felt surreal after everything that had happened. "What will you do now?" I asked her. She took a deep breath, seeming to draw strength from the expansive sky above us. "Get a divorce, obviously! Find a therapist! Maybe go back to art school and finish my degree. You could stay with me for a while," I offered. "I have the spare room at the loft." She looked at me, surprise and gratitude mixing in her expression. "After everything that happened, you'd still take me in?" "You're my sister," I said simply. "Gage tried to destroy both of us. I'm not going to let him succeed." For the first time in days, Ember smiled. A small, fragile thing, but genuine. "Remember how grandmother always said we were stronger together than apart?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. She was right. As darkness fell over the vineyard, the family gathered in the library. The atmosphere was somber but resolute. The weekend that was supposed to be about reconnection had instead revealed deep fractures, but also the strength that held us together despite them. "I've spoken with a lawyer friend," Uncle Dorian announced. "He's agreed to represent Ember pro bono in the divorce proceedings." Aunt Vivienne, forever practical, added, "And I've called my friend at the women's shelter. They have resources to help Ember get back on her feet." Phoenix raised her glass of wine. "To family, the real kind, the ones who have your back, not the ones who stab you in it." We all drank to that, even Ember, whose hands had finally stopped trembling. Later, as I lay in bed trying to process everything, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera. "Update, cryptocurrency recovered, total recovery now at 96% of stolen funds. We'll continue working on remaining 4%. Relief washed over me. My studio would survive. The expansion could proceed. Gage hadn't managed to destroy what I built. But more importantly, my sister was free from his control, and that was worth more than any amount of money. 2 days after the dramatic arrest at our family gathering, we gathered in the estate's library for what Detective Rivera called a controlled confrontation. Gage, released on bail but under strict monitoring, had been brought back to the house to face the family he'd betrayed, while officers stood by. The detective had explained her strategy earlier. Sometimes in complex fraud cases like this, getting the perpetrator to speak freely in familiar surroundings can reveal information about additional victims or hidden assets. Gage sat stiffly on the edge of the leather armchair, looking diminished without his usual confident posture. His eyes darted around the room, calculating still, searching for an angle. "I want to start by saying I've done nothing illegal," he began, his voice taking on the reasonable tone I'd heard him use to manipulate situations countless times before. "This is all a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand." "A misunderstanding?" I couldn't help interrupting. "You stole over 200,000 from me. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a felony." Gage's expression hardened. "You have no proof I did anything. For all anyone knows, Ember could have accessed your accounts. She knew your passwords too." My sister flinched beside me, and I felt a surge of protective anger. "Is that your defense? Trying to blame your wife?" "I'm simply pointing out reasonable doubt," Gage said smoothly. "The prosecution will need to prove beyond." "Save the legal talk," Detective Rivera interrupted. "We have more than enough evidence to proceed with charges. What we're doing today is giving you a chance to cooperate, potentially reducing your sentence." Gage scoffed. "You have nothing. Some circumstantial evidence, maybe a few account numbers, nothing that definitively ties me to any transfers." It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I glanced at Detective Rivera, who gave me a subtle nod. "Actually," I said, reaching for my messenger bag, "we have much more than that." Gage's eyes followed my movements as I pulled out my tablet. "What is that supposed to be? Remember last Christmas when you asked about my business security after that hacking attempt?" I asked conversationally. "How interested you were in what measures I'd taken." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Vaguely. What I didn't mention," I continued, "was that after that incident, I installed security cameras in my bedroom here at the estate. Small ones, very discreet." The blood drained from Gage's face so quickly I thought he might faint. "You're bluffing," he whispered, but the confidence had vanished from his voice. "Am I?" I turned the tablet around to show the screen crystal clear footage of Gage in my bedroom, methodically searching through my belongings, finding my laptop, and sitting at the desk to access it. "This is illegal surveillance," he sputtered, looking desperately to Detective Rivera. "She can't record people without consent. Actually, Mr. Ashford owns this property jointly with his sister," the detective replied calmly. "He's within his rights to install security cameras in his own bedroom, especially after experiencing previous theft attempts." Gage's eyes darted to Ember, who stared back at him with newfound strength. "You knew about this?" he demanded. "No," Ember said quietly, "but I'm glad he did it." Gage's demeanor shifted instantly, his face contorting with rage. "You ungrateful, after everything I've done for you." The officers moved closer as Gage rose from his chair, his hands curled into fists. "Done for her?" Uncle Dorian's voice boomed across the room. "You've done nothing but abuse and manipulate her." "Stay out of this, old man," Gage snarled. "This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife soon enough," Ember corrected, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in years. Gage laughed, the sound ugly and threatening. "You think it's that easy to leave me? I own you, Ember. I know every dirty little secret, every weakness. By the time I'm done, you'll have nothing and no one." "That's enough." Detective Rivera stepped forward. "Mr. Morrow, you're now adding witness intimidation to your charges." Gage ignored her, his focus entirely on Ember. "Remember those videos I have? One phone call and they go to everyone you know, your friends, your family, your precious brother." Uncle Dorian stood, his normally jovial face stern with anger. "Are you threatening my niece in front of police officers, son?" "It's not a threat, it's a promise," Gage spat. "She belongs to me. Everything she has belongs to me, including her stuck-up brother's money." I exchanged glances with Detective Rivera, who gave me another subtle nod. Everything Gage said was being recorded, each threat adding to the case against him. "I think we've heard enough," the detective said. "Mr. Morrow will be adding intimidation and coercion charges based on your statements here today." Gage suddenly seemed to realize his mistake, his lawyer's facade slipping back into place. "I'm under stress. I didn't mean any of that." "I think you meant every word," I said, standing to face him directly. "And I think you've been using those same threats to control my sister for years." But here's what you never understood about our family, Gage. We protect our own. Against who? He sneered. You couldn't even protect your precious investment accounts from me. Couldn't I? I raised an eyebrow. Those cameras weren't the only security measure I had in place. The cybersecurity consultant I hired installed tracking software that recorded everything you did on my devices, every keystroke, every password attempt, every account number you entered. We have it all, Gage. Every move you made is documented. The realization that he'd been outplayed all along hit him visibly. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I glimpsed the coward beneath the confident exterior. You set me up, he whispered. No, I corrected him. I protected myself. There's a difference. Before Gage could respond, a commotion at the front door drew everyone's attention. Two men in suits entered, flanked by uniformed officers. Gage Morrow? One of the suits announced, holding up a badge. We have some questions about your involvement in a cryptocurrency fraud ring operating across state lines. Gage's face went from pale to ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. The FBI agent's expression remained impassive. We've been investigating a sophisticated crypto scheme for months. Your name came up repeatedly in our investigation. When the local police reported your arrest, it connected several dots for us. This is ridiculous, Gage protested weakly. I'm a blockchain consultant, not some criminal. Is that why we found evidence of at least 15 stolen identities on your cloud storage? The agent asked. Or why your name appears on lease documents for properties where fraudulent crypto wallets were being created? As the implications sank in, I realized Gage's theft from my accounts wasn't an isolated incident or a crime of opportunity. It was part of a much larger operation. The family gathering had simply provided convenient access to my devices. The FBI agents continued questioning Gage, who grew increasingly agitated when they mentioned a co-conspirator named Victor who had already agreed to testify. Gage lost what remained of his composure. Victor is lying, he shouted, jumping to his feet. I never touched those wallet keys. That was all him and Chen. The agents exchanged satisfied glances. Gage had just implicated himself and provided another name. As the situation spiraled beyond his control, Gage made one desperate move. He lunged toward the door, shoving past an officer in a frantic escape attempt. The commotion that followed was brief but chaotic, officers wrestling Gage to the ground as he fought and shouted threats. This isn't over, he yelled as they handcuffed him. Ember, tell them I didn't do anything. Tell them. My sister stood perfectly still, watching her husband's breakdown with strange detachment. I'm done lying for you, Gage, she said quietly. I'm done being afraid. Something in Gage seemed to snap at her words. As the officers pulled him to his feet, he fixed her with a look of pure hatred. You're nothing without me. Nothing. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't make it on your own. Ember walked slowly toward him, stopping just out of reach. For a moment, the room held its breath. I was nothing with you, she said, her voice clear and steady. Without you, I can finally be myself again. As the officers led Gage away, his threats fading into the distance, Ember turned to me with tears in her eyes, not of fear or sadness, but of relief. It's really over, she whispered. I pulled her into a tight hug. Yes, I promised. It's really over. The FBI agents remained to take additional statements, explaining that Gage's arrest was likely to lead to more discoveries about the cryptocurrency fraud ring he'd been involved with. What had started as personal betrayal had revealed a criminal operation affecting countless victims beyond our family. That evening, as the law enforcement officials finally cleared out of the estate, our family gathered on the back terrace, watching the sunset over the vineyard. The gathering that had begun with such tension had transformed into something unexpected, a true coming together in the face of betrayal. You know, Phoenix said, breaking the contemplative silence, this isn't how I pictured this weekend going, but I think we're closer now than we've been in years. Uncle Dorian nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. Aunt Vivienne, ever practical, added, and to show you who brings an umbrella and who leaves you to get soaked. The simple analogy brought unexpected laughter, releasing some of the tension we'd all been carrying. As darkness fell, I sat beside Ember on the terrace steps, shoulders touching in quiet solidarity. What happens now? She asked softly. Now, I said, we rebuild, together. 1 month after the disastrous family gathering, I sat in my newly expanded gaming studio, watching the morning sunlight filter through the large windows. The space was everything I'd dreamed of, modern and creative, with multiple development workstations showcasing our latest game projects. My phone buzzed with a text from Sage. "First month numbers looking amazing! Your interview with TechCrunch is already driving new partnerships. You were right about everything." I smiled, allowing myself a moment of pride. Despite Gage's best efforts, Shadowmere Studios had not only survived but thrived. The expansion was proceeding ahead of schedule, and early indicators suggested we'd break even on our investment months ahead of projections. The investment firm had been surprisingly efficient in restoring my stolen funds. Detective Rivera's detailed evidence and the FBI's involvement had expedited the process, and within 3 weeks, I'd recovered 98% of the stolen money. The remaining 2% was still tied up in cryptocurrency transactions that proved more difficult to reverse, but the firm had actually covered that portion as part of their fraud protection guarantee once the case was clearly established. My phone rang. "Ember, right on time for our daily check-in. How's the new space?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Busy in the best way," I replied. "How was therapy?" "Hard," she admitted. "We're digging into the patterns that made me vulnerable to Gage in the first place. Lots of childhood stuff I never dealt with after Grandma and Grandpa died. That's good though, right? To finally address it?" "It is," she agreed. "Painful, but necessary, like lancing an infection." After the gathering, Ember had moved into my spare bedroom temporarily while she sorted out her next steps. The arrangement had its awkward moments. We were both adults used to our independence, but it had also given us a chance to rebuild the closeness we'd lost when Gage entered the picture. Ember had filed for divorce immediately, with Uncle Dorian's lawyer friend guiding her through the process. The evidence of Gage's crimes made it relatively straightforward from a legal perspective, though emotionally it remained challenging. "Did you hear about Gage's new charges?" she asked. "No, what happened?" "The FBI found connections to cryptocurrency fraud operations in 4 states, she explained. "They're saying he could face up to 20 years now, especially with the evidence from his cloud storage." The news brought complicated feelings. While I was glad Gage would face consequences for his actions, the scale of his crimes was still shocking to process. How had none of us recognized the monster hiding behind his confident smile? "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. Ember was quiet for a moment. "Relieved," she finally said, "and sad for the person I thought I married, who never actually existed." After we hung up, I walked through my studio, checking on my development team and reviewing progress on our latest projects. Around noon, Phoenix arrived with lunch and coffee. "This place is incredible," she exclaimed, taking in the studio as we settled at the conference table. "You've created something really special here, Thorne." "Thanks to the Family Crisis Fund," I joked, referring to the informal collection our relatives had taken up to help cover expenses while my accounts were frozen. The gesture had touched me deeply, especially coming from family members who weren't particularly wealthy themselves. "Speaking of family," Phoenix said, "Aunt Vivienne wants to know if you and Ember are still coming to her Christmas dinner next week." "Wouldn't miss it," I assured her. "Ember's actually making those gingerbread cookies Aunt Vivienne loves." "That's a good sign," Phoenix observed. "Ember baking again." It was, indeed. In the weeks following Gage's arrest, Ember had slowly reclaimed pieces of herself that had disappeared during her marriage. Her love of baking, her dry sense of humor, her interest in environmental art that had once been her college passion. The healing wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others. There were nights I heard her crying in her room, processing the manipulation and abuse she'd endured, but there were also moments of genuine laughter, of connection, of the sister I remembered beginning to re-emerge. That evening, I closed the studio and drove home to find Ember in the kitchen, surrounded by ingredients for dinner. "I thought we could eat together tonight," she explained. "I'm trying that risotto recipe Grandma used to make." The mention of our grandmother brought a bittersweet smile. "She'd be proud of you, you know," I said, washing my hands to help with preparation. "For getting out, for starting over." "She'd be proud of both of us," Ember replied. "You for building your business, me for rebuilding my life. Different kinds of bravery." As we chopped vegetables side by side, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 month. The crisis that could have destroyed my business and permanently fractured our family had instead created space for honesty and healing. The next day, I met with Raven, my cybersecurity consultant, to review the enhanced security measures for both my business and personal accounts. "You're officially my most security-conscious client," she laughed as she showed me the new systems. "Most people don't get this serious until after they've been hacked multiple times." "Once was more than enough," I assured her. "I've learned my lesson about being prepared." "That reminds me," Raven said. "I'd been meaning to ask, how did you know to install those cameras in your bedroom at the estate? That wasn't part of our security plan." I smiled, remembering the decision that had ultimately saved my business. "Last Christmas, I noticed some of my things had been moved in that room. Nothing missing, just not quite where I'd left them. I thought I was being paranoid, but I installed the cameras anyway, just in case." "Always trust your instincts," Raven nodded approvingly. Those instincts had served me well in business and ultimately in protecting myself from Gage's schemes. But they hadn't helped me see what was happening to my sister. That blind spot still troubled me. That weekend, our family gathered at the estate again, not for a formal celebration, but for a workday to refresh the property that held so many memories. Uncle Dorian directed maintenance crews, Aunt Vivienne supervised a deep cleaning of the kitchen, and cousins and their children helped with yard work. Ember and I tackled the bedrooms, packing away old items and discussing what to keep and what to donate. "I've been thinking," she said as we sorted through a box of childhood mementos, "about selling my half of the estate to you." I looked up in surprise. "You don't want it anymore?" She gazed out the window at the sparkling vineyard. "It's not that. I just need a fresh start, financially and emotionally. The money would help me go back to art school, finish my degree." "Are you sure?" I asked. "This place has been in our family for generations, and it will still be in the family with you," she pointed out. "Besides, you'll let me visit, right?" "Of course," I promised. "Anytime." Later, as everyone gathered on the terrace for a picnic lunch, I watched my family with new appreciation. Uncle Dorian telling his terrible jokes, Aunt Vivienne fussing over everyone having enough to eat, Phoenix's kids playing in the garden, the ordinary moments that formed the foundation of our shared history. Ember sat beside me, her face tilted toward the sun, looking more peaceful than I'd seen her in years. "You know what I've learned from all this?" she said quietly. "What's that?" "That family isn't just about blood, it's about boundaries. About protecting each other without enabling harmful behavior." "That's profound," I acknowledged. "And true. Grandma used to say something similar," Ember recalled. "Love without limits isn't love, it's negligence." I didn't understand what she meant until now. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself sitting with Uncle Dorian on the porch, watching the family activity in the garden. "I've been meaning to thank you," I told him, "for speaking up about Gage accessing your accounts. That couldn't have been easy to admit." He sighed, his weathered face solemn. "I should have said something sooner. Maybe if I had, he wouldn't have been able to target you or hurt Ember for so long." "We all miss the signs," I said, "all of us." "That's the thing about predators like Gage," he reflected. "They count on our silence, our embarrassment, our desire to keep the peace. They thrive in the gaps between what we know and what we're willing to say out loud." His words resonated deeply. How many times had I noticed something off about Gage but dismissed it to avoid conflict? How many opportunities had I missed to really see what was happening to my sister? The next week, Ember and I visited our grandparents' graves together, something we hadn't done as a pair since the funeral. We placed fresh flowers and stood in companionable silence before the shared headstone. "Do you think they'd be disappointed in me?" Ember finally asked. "For being so blind about Gage?" "No," I said firmly. "They'd be proud of your courage in getting out, in starting over." "And you? Are you disappointed in me?" The question caught me off guard. God, no. If anything, I'm disappointed in myself for not seeing what was happening sooner. Ember touched my arm gently. "We both missed things, but we're here now, together. That's what matters." As we walked back to the car, Ember looked more resolute than I'd seen her since before Gage. "I'm thinking of starting a support group," she said, "for women coming out of financially abusive relationships. There aren't many resources specifically for that aspect of domestic abuse." "That's a brilliant idea," I encouraged her. "You could really help people." Maybe, she said thoughtfully. At the very least, I can show them they're not alone, that there's life after survival. 3 months after the family gathering that changed everything, I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly numbers for the studio. The expansion was succeeding beyond my projections, and we'd hired 5 new developers to keep up with demand. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera. Thought you'd want to know. Gage accepted a plea deal, 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. Your evidence was key. Thank you for your courage. I forwarded the message to Ember, who was in class at the art college where she'd re-enrolled to finish her degree. Her response came quickly. Closure, finally. Dinner tonight to celebrate? Absolutely, I replied. I'll bring the champagne. That evening, as we toasted to new beginnings, I reflected on the strange journey of the past few months. What Gage had intended as my financial ruin had instead forced me to strengthen my business protections and deepen my family connections. What he had meant for harm had ultimately led to healing, to boundaries, Ember proposed as a toast, and to bridges, I added, the ones worth rebuilding. We clinked glasses, siblings reconnected, survivors both. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but we would navigate it together, wiser, stronger, and free from the shadows of the past. If you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal or supported someone through their healing journey, let me know in the comments below. These stories of resilience remind us that we're never truly alone in our struggles. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that there's always hope after hardship. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, family is what we make it through choices of both protection and connection.